When I was a child, around 8 or 9 years old, my family moved into an old Victorian house on the outskirts of town. The house had a reputation among the locals. Whispers of ghostly apparitions and unexplained noises floated around the neighborhood. My parents dismissed these stories as superstitions, but to a child with an active imagination, they were deeply unsettling. The house itself was a grand, 3-story building with tall windows and creaky wooden floors. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, and I remember lying awake at night, listening to the house settle. Every creak and groan seemed amplified in the darkness, but there was one sound that stood out from the rest, a faint shuffling noise coming from the attic. One night, I decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight and fueled by a mix of curiosity and fear, I crept up the narrow staircase to the attic. The door was heavy and old, and it creaked loudly as I pushed it open. The attic was filled with old furniture, dusty boxes, and cobwebs. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, casting eerie shadows on the walls. As I explored the attic, I noticed something strange. In the far corner, there was an old, wooden rocking chair. It was moving ever so slightly, as if someone had just gotten up from it. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I backed away slowly, but then I heard it, a low, whispering voice. "Leave, now." I froze. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I turned and ran, tripping over boxes and knocking over an old lamp. I didn't stop until I was back in my room, the door firmly shut behind me. I told my parents what had happened, but they assured me it was just my imagination. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was up there, watching me. The next few nights were restless. I could hear the shuffling noise more clearly now, and sometimes it was accompanied by the faint sound of someone crying. I tried to ignore it, burying my head under the covers and squeezing my eyes shut, but the fear lingered. One evening, my older brother, Alex, decided to confront the source of the noises. He was 13 and much braver than I was. He grabbed a baseball bat and headed up to the attic, determined to prove there was nothing to be afraid of. I followed him, clutching my flashlight and staying close behind. When we reached the attic, it was just as I had left it, dark, dusty, and filled with shadows. Alex swung the bat around, pretending to be a monster hunter, but then he stopped, staring at the rocking chair. It was moving again, more violently this time. "Who's there?" Alex called out, his voice cracking slightly. There was no answer, but the whispering began again, louder and more urgent. "Leave, now." The temperature in the attic seemed to drop, and we could see our breath in the air. Suddenly, the rocking chair flew across the room, smashing into the wall. We both screamed and bolted down the stairs, slamming the attic door behind us. We told our parents what had happened, and this time, they couldn't ignore the fear in our voices. My dad decided to investigate the attic himself, armed with a flashlight and a determined expression. He spent nearly an hour up there, but when he came back down, he looked pale and shaken. "We're moving," he said, and that was all he would say on the matter. We left the house a week later, and I never found out what my dad saw in the attic that night. But the memory of that whispering voice and the moving rocking chair stayed with me. It wasn't until years later that I learned the truth. The house had once belonged to a family who had tragically lost their daughter in a fire. She had been trapped in the attic, unable to escape. Her spirit, it seemed, had never left. The shuffling noises, the whispers, and the moving chair were all desperate attempts to reach out, to tell her story. The moral of my childhood experience is a chilling reminder: sometimes, the past lingers, and the restless spirits of those who suffered can still reach out to the living. Respect the history of the places you live, for you never know what secrets they might hold. The summer of 1985 was one that 8-year-old Emma would never forget. Her parents had enrolled her in a remote summer camp nestled deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest town. The camp, Camp Echo, had been operational for decades, known for its rustic cabins and thrilling nature activities. But what drew kids most was the ghost stories whispered around the campfires, tales that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up and your heart race with fear. Emma was assigned to Cabin 6, a quaint wooden structure that stood slightly apart from the other cabins. Her cabin mates, Amy, Sarah, and Jessica, were friendly and excited, and the first few days passed in a blur of hiking, swimming, and crafts. As the nights grew darker, the stories around the campfire grew more intense. One evening, the camp director, Mr. Thompson, decided to share a tale that no one had ever heard before. He called it, "The Echo of the Woods." According to Mr. Thompson, years ago, a young girl named Lily had gone missing in the very woods surrounding the camp. Despite extensive searches, she was never found. It was said that on quiet nights, you could hear her cries echoing through the trees, calling for help. Emma felt a chill run down her spine as Mr. Thompson's voice lowered to a whisper. The firelight cast eerie shadows on his face, making him look almost ghostly. That night, Emma found it hard to sleep. Every creak and rustle outside seemed magnified in the darkness, making her heart pound with fear. A few nights later, a fierce thunderstorm hit the camp. The wind howled, and the rain pounded on the cabin roofs like 1,000 tiny hammers. The power went out, plunging the camp into complete darkness. The girls in Cabin 6 huddled together, their flashlights casting long, flickering beams. As the storm raged on, Emma thought she heard something over the noise, a faint, high-pitched cry. She strained her ears, and there it was again, a soft, desperate wail. "Did you hear that?" she whispered to the others. The girls nodded, their faces pale with fear. They listened intently, and the cry came again, clearer this time. It seemed to be coming from the woods. Summoning their courage, the girls decided to investigate. Armed with flashlights and the bravery of youth, they slipped out of the cabin and into the storm. The rain soaked them to the skin, and the wind nearly knocked them off their feet, but they pressed on, drawn by the eerie cry. As they ventured deeper into the woods, the cry grew louder and more distinct. It was a voice, unmistakably that of a young girl, calling for help. Lily, Emma thought, her heart pounding in her chest. They followed the voice to a small clearing, where they found an old, dilapidated well. The cries seemed to be coming from inside. Terrified yet determined, the girls peered into the well. The beam of their flashlights revealed nothing but darkness. "We need to go get help," Sarah said, her voice trembling. But just as they turned to leave, the ground beneath them gave way. With a scream, they tumbled into a hidden underground chamber, the earth closing above them. In the pitch-black darkness, the girls felt around, finding only cold, damp stone walls. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped. The cries continued, now echoing all around them, growing louder and more frantic. Emma fumbled for her flashlight, and when she finally managed to turn it on, she froze in horror. There, standing in the corner, was a figure. A girl, her clothes tattered and her face pale as the moon, staring at them with hollow eyes. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing off the walls. It was Lily. Emma's mind raced. They had to find a way out, but the chamber seemed completely sealed. Then, Lily pointed to a narrow passageway at the far end of the chamber. The girls crawled through it, emerging in a dense part of the forest. The storm had passed, and the night was eerily calm. When they finally made it back to camp, they found Mr. Thompson and the other counselors waiting for them, worry etched on their faces. The girls recounted their terrifying experience, and Mr. Thompson's face grew somber. He led them to the camp's small chapel, where an old photograph hung on the wall. It was Lily, her eyes forever haunted. The next morning, a team of searchers went into the woods and found the old well. Inside, they discovered a hidden chamber, just as the girls had described. But there was no sign of Lily. The camp closed early that year, and Emma never returned. But she never forgot the night she came face to face with the ghost of Camp Echo, a reminder that some stories are more than just tales around a campfire. In a small town nestled at the edge of a dense forest, lived a young boy named Jack. Jack was a curious and adventurous child, always eager to explore the unknown. His parents often warned him about the Whispering Woods, a place steeped in local legends and chilling tales. It was said that those who ventured too far into the forest never returned, their whispers forever echoing through the trees. One autumn afternoon, Jack and his best friend, Emily, decided to test their courage. Ignoring the warnings, they ventured into the Whispering Woods. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sounds being the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees. As they walked deeper into the woods, the light began to fade, and an unsettling feeling crept over them. The trees seemed to close in, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Despite the growing unease, Jack's curiosity pushed him forward. Emily, however, started to feel a sense of dread. "Jack, maybe we should go back," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "Come on, Emily. Don't be scared." "We'll be fine," Jack replied, though his own confidence was starting to waver. They pressed on until they stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. The door hung loosely on its hinges, and the windows were shattered, giving the place a haunted appearance. Jack's heart raced with excitement, but Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "Let's check it out," Jack said, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. Reluctantly, Emily followed Jack into the cabin. The inside was dark and musty, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. As they explored, they found an old diary lying on a dusty table. Jack picked it up and began to read aloud. September 13, 1924. The whispers are growing louder. I fear they are coming for me, Jack read, his voice trembling. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind blew through the cabin, extinguishing the small flashlight they had brought. The room plunged into darkness, and a low whispering sound began to fill the air. Jack and Emily froze, their breaths shallow and hearts pounding. "Did you hear that?" Emily whispered, clutching Jack's arm. "Yeah," Jack replied, his voice barely audible. The whispers grew louder, circling around them like a sinister chant. Jack and Emily tried to move, but their legs felt like lead. The fear was paralyzing. "Leave this place," the whispers seemed to say, each word chilling them to the bone. Panicked, Jack fumbled for the flashlight, finally managing to turn it back on. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing a shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and it seemed to float above the ground. "Run!" Jack screamed, grabbing Emily's hand. They bolted out of the cabin, the whispers growing louder and more frantic. As they sprinted through the forest, the shadows seemed to follow them, whispering threats and warnings. The trees loomed like dark sentinels, their branches clawing at the fleeing children. Jack and Emily didn't stop until they burst out of the woods and into the safety of their town. Breathless and terrified, they collapsed on the ground, their hearts still racing. The whispers faded, leaving only the sound of their pounding hearts and gasping breaths. From that day on, Jack and Emily never spoke of the Whispering Woods. The experience had left them shaken, and they heeded the warnings of their elders. They had learned a valuable lesson about curiosity and the dangers of venturing into the unknown. Years later, as adults, Jack and Emily would occasionally glance towards the Whispering Woods, a shiver running down their spines. They knew better than to challenge the dark secrets that lay within. The forest kept its whispers, and they kept their silence. But every now and then, on quiet, moonlit nights, the townsfolk would hear faint whispers carried on the wind, reminding them of the haunted woods and the children who had dared to enter. And they would pull their blankets tighter, whispering their own prayers that the whispers never found their way into their dreams.